let's talk about college here, and it takes me back a couple of years, but I think a lot of you may have a recollection of this as well. There's a movie. I always like this movie. Now it's not everybody's cup of tea, but Al Pacino is in this movie called Scent of a Woman. He's supposed to play a blind former Army officer, high-ranking lieutenant colonel. And the movie ends up with all of his adventures on a last chance weekend in New York. At any rate, movie winds up with his young charge. The guy who played Robin in or other Batman and Robin movies, and he ends up going back to his prep school where they're throwing each other under the bus on something that happened that was basic hijinks, but they're told you need to turn you need to narc on your fellow student here. And it's going to mess up, of course, their college career. And they correctly say, who's the one they're really going to throw under? You're not from a rich family. They're going to throw you under the bus. Throwing each other under the bus, wrecking a potential college career, ratting out. At that time, it was done in front of the whole school. Well, now it's on social media, ladies and gentlemen. And what is this all about? Let's talk about it this morning with Catherine Mars, certified educational consultant. She's up to date on these things. Welcome back, Catherine.
Well, thank you, David, for having me on your show. Yes, this is happening, but I don't know that it's terribly prevalent. I would like to hope it's not.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I think
the idea of using
sign.
social media to try to undermine your classmate. I mean, to what end? And why is it only for the most prestigious, quote unquote, universities where everybody's trying for an edge, even if they're people they know from their own hometown, their own school, their own prep school?
Well, I think that it is certainly, if it's going to be more prevalent, is going to be with the highly selective schools.
Yeah.
And I think that if it is going to happen, it's going to happen in smaller private or smaller public, selective, highly competitive high schools where the students know that the colleges are only going to accept one or two kids from their class. And so, what my advice is that, number one, kids be very sensitive about what they post on social media, and number two, that they don't talk about where they've applied, nor do they talk about where they've been accepted. Because once they brag about where they've been accepted, those students who maybe were not accepted or waitlisted may have an interest in sabotaging.
Well, I have, I've got two out of college recently, one in and one about to enter, and I'm telling you, these kids talk to one another all the time, and I think they're trying to share some information, Catherine, because rather than a lot of them are just trying to figure out, like with the tests, what are you going to need to get into X, what kind of test number, are you going to go to the extra classes and tutors with me? You know what I'm saying? And they share
Exactly.
They share a lot of info to try to help one another. I don't think they think of it in terms of hurting one another, unless it's like you say, at the high end, and then I guess all bets are off. All bets are off.
Right. I think so. I think that and it doesn't help that highly, highly selective colleges send out so much literature and mailings, et cetera, to students who may not, frankly, be qualified for their school, but they still entice them to apply. And I think that also makes it even more competitive.
No, it's a cutthroat environment out there, and it cuts both ways. Is it fair for schools now to be sifting through, taking anonymous emails of links to pages of possible applicants? I mean, is that just fair game now in the admissions side, the admissions scene, where before it would be a formal written application, some written letters of recommendation, an interview? That's the way it used to be done in my day. So why is it really so different now?
Well, it is different, but I do have to say that, college admissions counselors have way too much to do. They are not going to go on every student and look at social media or look at an anonymous email. What they will do, though, if an application has any kind of red flag on it, or the counselor that's reviewing the application, the professional at the admissions office, feels like there's something just not quite right, then yes, they might go searching for public information about that student on social media.
Or at least do a Google search and see what pops up. You never know what can come up that way, even
Exactly.
with legal issues. Not a full background check, but it's always amazing what pops up when you Google out there. And I'm not trying to just give them a
Absolutely.
free plug, but it doesn't take people very long to do that. Ethical issues involved here? Are there any in your mind? Are those strong?
Well, I think the ethical issues are moral issues. I mean, I think that, honesty is the best policy, being very particular about what you put online, and just, kind of walking a straight line as much as possible.
Yeah, it does. It does make straight line on social media is definitely in the eye of the beholder. That's for sure.
Exactly.
And what may be perfectly acceptable in your world with your students and or your children might be different down the street. The thing is that you have to meet a certain standard at a certain school. Is they may not have variable standards for your kids versus those other kids, and you got to try to read through the tea leaves a bit with that. And that's probably where things have changed somewhat. And you go from innocent to not funny and potentially sabotaging pretty quick, can't you? In your
Yes, you
experience?
can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there are some shared standards that maybe should be tried and true and carry over, as opposed to, well, it's up to everybody individually. I get that, and that's very libertarian online, but still, the old line, don't do it. My first car, Catherine, was my great grandmother's Plymouth Valiant, and my dad used to say when I go on dates, she's riding with you, don't do anything that grandma wouldn't like. So, I mean, there are some,
Right. And
don't do anything. Don't do anything to embarrass the family.
Right. Did you have push buttons?
I sure did, down the left side, 225 slant 6.
That's right.
In that baby,
Absolutely. I had one of those.
You had the same car?
I did. I called it the Turtle.
Well, they did. They did have a turtle look. Hey, I'll tell you what, the engine was bulletproof. But I used to tell my dad, Dad, look what I'm driving. I mean, how crazy do you think it's going to get? Look what I'm driving. He goes, those are your wheels, so treat it good, buddy boy.
That's
And
right.
I did.
That's right.
It was handed down. But the idea of don't do anything that would embarrass the family, that should apply when you're online now too, and you're 18, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, this all got started, or at least came to the surface with the news that the students that were their acceptances rescinded from Harvard. The students that reported them or reported to admissions that they were not comfortable with what they were posting on the MIME page or the meme page that they had for the admitted students. That was really, I think, a very good thing in the sense that the students were saying, we're not comfortable with sitting in class with these types of kids if this is how they think. Well, I think that makes perfectly good sense. You want to be surrounded by like-minded people, but you want to be surrounded by like-minded people who have good values.
Well, or at least you want to be surrounded by people that you don't have to be afraid of 24/7, 365. And some of the things you see online involving abuse, suicide, assault, other things, videotape, they're not cool. And I get that.
Right.
If it's political speech, you go to college, I think you should be exposed to a lot of different things. That's a separate segment and separate rant. That's for sure. Catherine Mars is here. We're both honorary members of the Plymouth Valiant Slant 6 push button fan club. This thing would never. I tell you what, though, that thing, it only left me high and dry once. Unfortunately, Catherine, it was in the desert. And that can be scary. But that's.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, boy, you weren't as sorry as I was that day. That's why I carried extra water in the back, in the trunk of that sucker. Catherine Mars, certified educational consultant. Where's the website, Catherine?
It's Mars, MARRSCAA.com.
Very good. Appreciate you being here very much.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me, Dave.
Yeah, we
Bye-bye.
both graduated onto better rides. Too over the years, but maybe not as many as we remember fondly. Mainly fondly. This is 1320 WILS.
In the blood sport of college application season, when
blood sport?
Yes, just wait. In the blood sport of college application season, when highly ranked institutions rarely admit more than one student from the same high school, some students try to even the odds by anonymously maligning their classmates.
How charming. Joining us on the Kogo News Live line is certified educational consultant Catherine Mars. And what are these kids doing to each other?
Well, good morning, LaDonna and Ted. Well, I think it's a small pocket of kids, but what it does is it reinforces the fact that students should not be talking about where they're applying to college to each other, and they should keep it kind of to themselves because, as Ted said, colleges are pretty selective, and they're only going to take one or two students from a small high school. So another thing to also keep in mind is not to brag a lot about where you got in once you've been accepted because of those students who might have gotten waitlisted or not accepted. And those are the ones that might be inclined to possibly want to sabotage the situation.
Okay, so let's talk about that sabotage. What specifically are they doing to sabotage these kids?
Well, I don't think they're really doing much, frankly, but what gives them opportunity is social media. So students and their parents need to pay close attention to what students post online. It's really, we are of the kids today or of the generation where it's kind of instant gratification and something comes into their mind and then they post it. Well, that's not always the greatest thing to do because it's permanently there.
Well, I'm reading here, though. I mean, I know you just said, but I'm reading things that say they post pictures of them, engaged in maybe underage drinking or crass comments about other students.
Well, that could be in maybe some very highly selective high schools where those kids are applying to those very, very selective schools that in many ways are kind of like a lottery because there are so many applicants and so few slots for those particular schools. So it could be in those situations maybe, but in the population of kids I work with, and some do go to those highly selective schools, I do not see this kind of cutthroat attitude.
Well, I tell you what, Catherine, we appreciate the time. What we're seeing, according to the reports anyway, that internet infractions like bullying, sexting, and off-color humor can become major obstacles to entry at the most prestigious schools. So Tell your kids to watch what they're doing on social media.